Quick no spoiler disclaimer ahead, this video does not contain any Borderlands 3 story spoilers, it's just some random background gameplay. A little over a week ago I made a video to greatly increase your FPS in Borderlands 3. I was actually able to double my FPS with those settings compared to the default ones. Since then a few more tips have popped up here and there, but nothing really changed anything drastically past that point for me, which was very unfortunate because even after optimizing all those settings, Borderlands 3 wasn't really running the way it should be considering my hardware and considering what the game actually looks like. The sad reality is that Borderlands 3 is simply not performing well right now on most PCs. Digital Foundry did some testing with high-end hardware, with mid-tier hardware and with some low-end stuff, and on none of those did they actually achieve the results that you'd expect for a game of this caliber. We know that optimization is being worked on, but I was still looking for more ways to increase my FPS in any way possible and also make the game feel more smooth overall, because even with high FPS I would still experience tearing and all that kind of stuff, which you really don't want in your game. And while looking for ways, I stumbled across a Reddit post that gave me a way to increase my FPS by a solid amount. For me it is roughly 10 FPS, it of course depends on your hardware and everything, without actually having any visible downgrades to the visuals in game, or at least nothing noticeable, and without actually lowering any settings in the game either. Starting from this moment you will see some background footage that actually had this lower frame rate that I had before changing the settings, and then after that I will show you some with the higher frame rate, and you will notice that there is roughly a 10 FPS difference. Typically in one I would play around 60 FPS, dipping down into the 50s, whereas on the other one I'd be around 70 and then sometimes dipping down to 60. It may be hard to tell with YouTube's compression, but I also felt that the amount of stutters and the amount of tearing was decreased by changing these settings. So how did that work? The entire credit for this method goes to Tim Jinks, and I will link his video right here in the description as well. Feel free to check that out and support him. I'm also going to post the Reddit thread that he made here, because this method is completely absurd and I have no idea how he stumbled across it, but it increases the FPS significantly. There are multiple steps to this one, the first one's being a little bit more straightforward and obvious, and then it gets really weird. So the first thing you want to do is verify that your power settings are set to best performance. If you don't know how to do that, you just click on your start bar icon, on your start icon, and just type in power to search for it, or click on the search bar next to it, depending on which Windows version you're on, and it'll bring up the power and sleep options for your PC. In these power and sleep settings, you will find performance and energy, where you can change the power mode between best energy savings and best performance, and you want to set that to best performance. Next, you want to open your NVIDIA control panel to change settings there. Now to do that, do the same thing, just click on your start bar or click on the search bar in your start bar and search for NVIDIA control panel. Open that and it should immediately open on Manage 3D settings. If it doesn't, click on Manage 3D settings on the left side. Here you will see two tabs for I would like to use the following three settings: Global settings and Program settings. You want to click on Program settings here because we're looking at Borderlands 3 specifically. Then you want to select Borderlands 3 as the program. It should pop up if you have opened it recently under the drop-down menu. If that's not the case, you can also manually add it by browsing the installation path on your PC. What you're looking for in this case is the borderlands3.exe file. And once you've found that, you want to change some settings specifically for this. You have to scroll down a little bit, and the first setting that you want to adjust here is Power Management Mode. The setting for that will be Prefer Maximum Performance. Also makes perfect sense. The other setting that you want to change is the texture filtering and isotropic sample optimization. This is typically turned off by default and you want to turn that on. After adjusting these settings, don't forget to click apply on the bottom right so that those settings will actually be applied to your game. And now we get to the rocket science part. For this next step you need NVIDIA Inspector. If you are not aware what that is, don't worry, it's not some super creepy malware that you have to install on your PC. It is simply a program that allows you to adjust some settings on your graphics card that you can't access through the normal 3D settings. You can technically also use it to overclock your graphics card and so on, but that's not what we're going to do here. We're just going to do something very, very simple, just one setting that we're going to change. I will provide the official link for it down below as well. Due to it being packed as a RAW file, you need something that you can open RAW files with. If you don't have a program for that, I recommend 7-Zip, because that doesn't give you a warning all the time that you have to get a license because you actually don't need a license for it. After unpacking that program somewhere, you simply want to open the folder and open the NVIDIA Inspector.exe file there. That will open the NVIDIA Inspector, which will show you an overview of your graphics card and the temperature and so on. One of the things it'll show you here is the driver version. We don't actually want to touch the drivers themselves, but next to the driver version, you'll find a button with some tools on it. You want to click on that, and then you will see a new window opening, which will show you various settings for a profile. Here you want to click on the drop-down menu next to Profiles, and you will simply start typing in BOR here, and then it should already show you Borderlands 3. Click on that and then scroll down a bit to Anti-Aliasing. There's a whole segment for different settings for anti-aliasing, and the one that we're interested in is Anti-Aliasing Transparency Super Sampling. This is the setting that you want to adjust. Apparently Borderlands currently has some problem with anti-aliasing, and this fixes that issue at least better than anything else does that I found. So you want to click on the drop down menu here and you want to find AA_mode_replay_mode_all. If you click that, the setting value hex next to it should be changed to 0 times many zeros and then 8 at the end and no other numbers. Click apply changes in the top right and close the program. There is a last step that Tim Jinx suggests as well that I find a bit tedious and maybe not that necessary, but if you want to see if it increases performance for you, I'm gonna line it out for you here anyways. If you open your task manager by pressing Ctrl Alt and Delete, then you will see your processes, and when you have Borderlands 3 open, then one of them will be Borderlands 3. You can right click on that and you can click on Go to Details, and then you will find an exe file for that, and when you right click on this one, you can then set the priority to high. That will technically increase your performance sometimes depending on how your PC is basically balancing everything. Usually full screen applications are prioritized anyways, but you would have to do that every time you start Borderlands 3, and for me the performance increase was not that noticeable because I didn't do it the second time around and I still had the performance increase from the other settings that were changed. Again, all credit for this method goes to Tim Jinx, so do him a favor and check out his video here and maybe subscribe to him. Outside of that, I've also done some further changes to my own settings based on some other videos, based on some more research that gave me some minor improvements, so I'm going to talk about this a little bit, and I'm also going to go over the settings that I adjusted in the last video for those of you who haven't watched that and want to have a quick summary of that as well. So in your in-game settings, under Options and Visuals, you first want to adjust some settings on the Basic Settings menu. You will almost always get better performance in full screen over windowed borderless, so change the display mode to that unless you have a very good reason to use windowed borderless. Even if your PC maintains the same frame rate as it is the case for me, the experience at full screen is usually a lot more smooth. Another thing that honestly can be used with Borderlands at the moment is the frame rate limit. Normally I like to keep my frames uncapped because especially if you have a higher Hertz monitor, that makes a lot of sense to have a high frame rate with that. Now the problem is that almost no PC actually achieves those high frame rates with Borderlands 3 at the moment. Most PCs that I've seen don't even reach a stable 60 FPS. You can maybe reach 60 FPS most of the time, but you'll still have drops below that, or your frame rate will be lower from the start. So unless your frame rate is significantly above 60 FPS, you can consider using the smooth 22 to 62 FPS. I think there's some downsides with that frame limit as well, but for me personally it looks very smooth. Or you can set it to capped 60, or you can set your own custom FPS and put it to whatever level you feel feels best for your PC. Because honestly, the stable frames in Borderlands right now look better than fluctuating frames with the inconsistency that Borderlands has for now. As an extension of that, you can even leave VSync, vertical sync, turned on. It's something that I'm typically not a fan of because it comes with input lag under certain circumstances, blah blah blah. Point is, in Borderlands 3, it doesn't really matter if you have a little bit of input lag, it's not going to cost you the game. There is no competitive mode for this, so it might just make it a more smooth experience. Of course, if you're running FreeSync or G-Sync already, that's a different story. And that brings us to the advanced settings, which you will find with the two cogwheels next to the one cogwheel for the basic settings. Here you have the option to change your graphics API to DirectX 12. That is not that good on some PCs yet, especially on older PCs, but if you have a modern GPU it might work for you. It can also drastically increase your loading times, and if nothing else helps, then you may have to go into Borderlands settings outside of the game and reset it to DirectX 11 if you can't start the game on 12 at all. So use this with a bit of caution. For me it was a drastic FPS increase, for others that may not be the case. You want to set the performance stats to FPS so that you can actually see if your frame rate is improving as well. And then we get to the graphics settings. The overall quality you want to set to very low, but then adjust every other setting after that individually. It's a weird thing, but apparently some internal settings are adjusted this way that you otherwise don't get access to. Anti-aliasing you want to set it to temporal. We've already done the other settings for that outside of the game. Now we get to the settings that depend a little bit more on your PC as well, so some of those may be different for you depending on how good your hardware is and if you're recording or streaming at the same time. Fidelity FX I left on, that didn't seem to make much of a difference for me, but camera motion blur and object motion blur I turned off. It just has an impact on performance at the moment and doesn't really add that much to Borderlands in my opinion anyways. The next one is very important, and that is texture streaming. You want to put that to low because texture streaming has an impact on scoping and has some stutter with scopes. If your PC is good enough, you can also set that to medium or maybe even to high, but I would definitely not recommend putting it on ultra, and I didn't see enough of an issue with it being on low that it would hinder my game experience greatly. The anisotropic filtering also depends on your PC. I just set it to 8. The material complexity is something that I would recommend setting to medium. It actually doesn't add much to the game visually from what I was able to find, and through testing others have found out that's quite a decent FPS increase with very little downsides to it. Shadows again are something that depend highly on your PC's overall performance. I set that to high, and most of the following settings are all on high. I didn't change anything here because I still want my game to look good. Again, depending on your PC you may have to lower them. The last 3 settings, however, are ones that have a decent impact on performance that I would put to medium. This is especially true for volumetric fog, but also the space screen reflections and the ambient occlusion. While in my last video I still recommended using the benchmark tool that's in this menu to test if these graphic settings work well for you, I would no longer recommend that. I unfortunately had to learn that the benchmark is not at all an accurate representation of how your FPS will be in game, especially not in later areas with a lot of enemies. The impact here on the performance can be drastically different. So even if I reach stable 80-90 FPS on the benchmark, I might still get 60 or lower while actually playing the game. It's a bit annoying. I would hope that the benchmark would have all kind of different levels of taxing tests on the PC, but it's unfortunately not the case. And that is it for my current settings for Borderlands 3, and I honestly think that's as far as I'll be able to push the performance until there is an actual performance update from the developers, which hopefully should be coming soon, and then we'll see again which settings we have to tweak a little bit or not. I've got a few Borderlands 3 character guides I'll link right here, as well as more Borderlands 3 content coming out in the future. I'm gonna talk about some major pros and cons about the game soon and how I feel about it so far. So if you're interested in that, feel free to subscribe to the channel. With that, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope to see you all for the next one tomorrow. Duke Sloth, out.